Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the Orville Season 2 on Disney+. Granted, I know that it's been on Hulu and stuff, but that's where I've been watching it. And I overall enjoyed this season. I think it was a better improvement over the first season, though there were still issues that popped up into play. Mainly in regards to certain more consistencies as it's kind of going through on certain kind of things. That mainly starts getting into issues in the back half of the season with certain characters like Bortus and Clyde. But overall, I think this had a better structuring of things as it got into more of a serious kind of tone, and the jokes seemed to flow better into the situations rather than seeming like sometimes there would be random kind of jokes inserted for reasons in the first season. Here the jokes flowed more naturally with certain kind of things and just seemed to fit within the nature of the universe and didn't undercut any kind of serious moments. When it was serious, it was serious. Even in certain kind of things when a funny thing was happening, like we get to like a Mocklin situation and somebody's quoting Dolly Parton and you see fucking Ed being like, oh god, how's this going to kind of work and go out? That still worked. It didn't undercut the seriousness of the situation. You're just like, okay, that's a definite kind of way to go with it. So the thing is, the episodic nature kind of works in its advantage and disadvantage mainly towards the end. Like, we get to see that Bortus is going to let Mocklin's only urinate once a year and ask the crew to come with him to Moklis to do this. And it's like, that's an interesting kind of one. And they go with the kind of jokes that kind of go with it. Let's see here. And then that one kind of like, because that's like the first episode, we also get that Claire's one son, Marcus, is having a bad influence from this other kid, and Isaac kind of is helping her kind of like connect with her kids and everything, which eventually starts to culminate in her attempting to do a relationship with Isaac, which is definitely handled pretty well. I mean, you get kind of echoes of like dated dating in The Next Generation, but you definitely see that Isaac is not at a kind of advanced level like that. He does attempt to do right with the dates, but as a machine and gathering social kind of data and everything like that, because he has sex with her, which is interesting how they use the kind of like the simulation holodeck to kind of achieve that fact and give him kind of a human form to do that. But it's never quite explained how he's able to kind of do that kind of shit, because you don't see any kind of parts that he can use in those kind of ways. Not granted, hands you can go for as like anything like that, but you definitely see it being interesting in how it's done with that, how the kids are attached to him like a dad, and that culminates in the whole kind of thing of him being deactivated by the Kalons and being taken to Kalon and being like, oh, why are they kind of waffing about of whether to join the Union or not. And of course they keep delaying, but they start seeing other kind of things popping up on the planet. And Ty, in acting like a kid, wanted to see Isaac. And the thing is, I'm going to explain this pretty well, I hope. I don't mind a kid being stupid. In this situation, a kid's stupidity makes sense. In this, he is sad. He wants to make sure that he has his friend who he's come to view as a father and wants to see that person. And he disregards the usual kind of rules. Like when you see other kids acting stupid, it kind of depends. If it's like this makes sense because we've seen this kid, his attachment to Isaac, what he wants to do because he wants him as like a father figure and views him as family, and he wants to go and see him. He doesn't completely understand the grasp of what's kind of going on and whether he can go into these areas or not, and that leads to snowballing kind of effects. Now granted, there's a little bit of a plot demandsy thing of like, hey, he fucking finds something that like gives them more information on the Kalons and what kind of goes on. But it works well enough and it is threaded well enough that even though there's cliches and tropes, it's done in a way that is its own way, its own Orville way. Whereas other ones, you could be like, this kid is acting how everybody would think like a young person does. Like the old kind of dynamics of people just getting into like, you don't respect your elders. You fucking don't know where you fucking put anything anymore because you're losing your goddamn memory and mind, you asshole. That kind of weird shit. Where, of course, growing up is a bitch. And growing old is a bitch. And it smacks the shit at everybody. But you know when writers are just like, they put into the barest minimum effort of like, this is an object that acts like how I think a young person acts. Or this is an object that acts like an old person I think acts. This is a character that wants to go and find Isaac. And in doing so, finds a room full of, well, skeletal remains and dead. So I was going to say dead bodies, but I'm like, it's gotten even to more of a point of just the remains. And they find out that they were the creators of the Kalons. And that they were pretty much used as slaves. And these motherfuckers put in pain receptors so that they could hurt the Kalons. Now, that is wrong, okay? No, you don't do that shit. However, they went to the extreme of exterminating and genociding all of them, and it's like, nah, we pretty much want to use the Orville as a sneak attack kind of thing to go in and wipe out all biologics within the known universe because we don't trust them. And I'm like, nope, that's taking the wrong lesson out of it. Like, holy fucking shit, you have now become that which you have destroyed. Which I think is a nice kind of commentary. Now, this is really kind of interesting because it definitely has echoes of, like, the Borg. Now, granted, there's no kind of assimilation factor going in, like the Jean-Luc Picard and, like, the whole battles that the Federation had to deal with on that kind of thing. But I think it's interesting to see that they're able to do their own spin on it and have the advanced kind of fleet coming in. We see that they're trying to deal with it. They take over the Orville. They're pretty much getting out there, and we get a nice battle scene. Only issue is that I wish there was some variation on the Union's kind of ships more, so that way it would be easier to understand which was the Orville and which wasn't, even though they're usually good at, like, centering in on the Orville. But we see that Kelly and Gordon decide to bug out, and they're able to get out, and they're trying to get assistance from the Krill, which is like, yeah, they might be religious fanatics who are like, you ain't got no soul, bitch, which would come into effect of, like, problems later on down the line. But when a robot's like, I'm gonna wipe out all you motherfuckers, you kind of have to be like, no, don't, like, I mean, you can be Big Dick Magoo if you want to, but if you need help for them to not push your shit in, and we're all dead, good luck to you, Holmes. As it is then shown as two kind of, like, I think it was two Kalon vessels pop up and just start pushing shit in before the Krill are able to kind of, like, deal with it. It's like, alright, we'll go help your asses out. And they help in the climactic battle, and it was a cool battle scene. Like, again, when I talk about certain kind of shows understanding how to utilize your budget well, this was how you do it. Like, they don't fuck over the other effects when they need it, but they're able to do what works for certain kind of situations and then use it spectacularly here, where you're able to see all this kind of stuff going on. You're like, the Kalons are fucking shit up. They almost get to Earth to, like, start blasting its ass, but of course the Krill show up and help them push them back as the Kalon retreat. It's like, oh shit, we might actually have some shit to deal with the Krill. Because we had seen that Ed had an episode detailing that he was getting close to this, what was it, antimatter or dark matter kind of cartographer, but you find out that it's Talela, and it's like, oh god, which becomes a recurring event of like, hey, here's this kind of romance thing, and it's like, you don't have to connect it with every fucking thing. Now granted, relationships are an important thing. I think Bortus's and Clyden's is the one that really deserved the most kind of introspection and detailed dive because of everything that was kind of going on. We do continue to keep getting back to the Ed and Kelly kind of thing, which understandable because they're like two of the main leads, but it's like, alright, because it's like, Ed wants to get back together with her. She's like, nope, we can't do it. We're, captain and the executive officer. We can't do that shit. It's like, yeah, understandable. Then that's brought up kind of later on going through. Let's see here. Just to kind of like get other kind of things going on. Bortus getting addicted to porn because of his issues with Clyden, and then having pretty much an STD pretty much take over the ship and almost destroy it. But then he like gets back and kind of helps them rescue this race from like getting eaten by a star. Granted, not all of the race, but enough of them to be like, hey, we actually helped them. Let's see. Alara's departure was handled pretty well, and that actually showed off some interesting kind of things, as she was losing her strength because she wasn't in the high gravity of her home planet, and decided to go home, try and figure out what was kind of going on. And of course her father was played by the hologram from Voyager, and then another person from Star Trek showed up in the same episode, another doctor as well, as she had to deal with this scenario that this couple lost their son to suicide because his research was refuted by her father, and they tried to pretty much like kill him. Ed's trying to like get Alara back in on the Orville, but she helps her family out, and they kind of come to an understanding, and she decides to leave the Orville as they get another Zelayan, Tala, to pop in, and she worked out pretty well enough. I don't think I have a complete handle on her, but even though she was in, because Alara leaves in the 3rd episode, and then again, you like see her throughout. There's 14 episodes, so you still get a good amount, but other kind of characters take most of the focus, mainly Bortus and the Mocklins, but that is because they have a lot of interesting stuff, because that dovetails into Isaac's whole kind of thing as well. I do like the utilization more of various different kinds of media. Like we'd seen that Ed was showing Talela, like The King and I, and other kind of older movies that you never really saw in other Star Trek shows, mainly because I think of like copyright laws and not being able to utilize certain things because those rights are fucking whack. But of course, old school kind of stuff would help out, because Ed had to deal with a situation with Kelly having a new boyfriend, Cassius, and he told Cassius that like her favorite band was Journey, and it's like, that's interesting. Let's see here. But that was a good episode with Ed and Talela, because it echoed this old kind of movie, Enemy Mine, where they get stranded and they have to trust each other, and Ed's like, listen, I don't want to hurt you. You have to trust me to help you out here, because the planet had this day and night cycle where it would be daytime for far longer than what would be going on. And we learned that the Krill have another alien species that they kind of fucked with, and they now found out about, because they're like, hey, the Krill might be more technologically advanced than the Union, but this other group's able to kind of push their shit in and actually shoot down their ship. But he's able to get Talela out and actually gets her back to the Krill people, and that of course starts like chains of events. You don't really see Talela being the one that like initiates any kind of things, but you see that like, hey, Ed could have killed these children, but he didn't. He could have killed Talela, but he didn't. And when the Kalons decide to come and push shit in, they asked for help, and they came and it's like, alright, you didn't fucking kill the people that helped you. Alright, because that leads to them attempting to do a peace talk thing. Let's see. I'll get to the peace talk in a minute. One was an interesting episode where we found out that they did a first contact thing, and the bigotry of the planet is that they had an aversion to birthdays, where a certain birth month they would put you in an internment camp. And it's like, sweet Jesus. Like, it just goes to show that certain people will fucking discriminate and have prejudice against anything. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. And they actually take Kelly and Bortus, and Kelly and Bortus is like, we ain't gonna handle this. Fuck this shit. So Ed and the rest are able to find the constellation. There was a black hole that had occurred, and they decide to pretty much utilize this kind of solar sail to make it look like the star came back, so that way they could get their people out, and they were able to. And I do like understanding the ethical quandaries of, do you lie to these people? Is like, normally you're like, it's not okay to lie, but these motherfuckers are interring people and having C-sections for babies when they're not ready, just because they were born on a certain, like, time frame. And not even because of an action they'd done. It's not like a baby came out and said, "Hey-ho, motherfucker," and, like, cracked a motherfucker. It's like, that baby was born on that day. And, like, it's not like a horde of babies are coming out and just fucking causing racked-ass havoc out of nowhere. Though, granted, that would be an interesting fucking episode to kind of explore where, like, almost like a Blood Moon werewolf kind of scenario where literally you have babies that come out fucking shit up. That'd be kind of nuts. Also, it goes to the kind of part of Pet Cemetery when that little kid gets that fucking, like, scalpel and fucking takes out Herman Munster's tendon. Fucking freaky ass shit. Ugh. But it's not like any of that's happening, or that anybody does any of that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, anybody who's born under that sign's like got violent tendencies and shit. It's like, alright, show me who else has violent tendencies and is not born under that sign. Like, you're just fucking nutty. It was interesting. I was like, alright. Let's see. We also get more into what goes on with Mockless, where we have one situation where we've got Tala, who links up with this Lokar dude, who was an ex-flame of Bortus, but we find out that he's attracted to females, and he does this whole kind of scenario. He comes on to Tala, and they're having this whole thing, but Clyden calls him out on it, and it made it look like that Clyden killed him. I'm like, no, okay, Clyden's a piece of shit, but you don't pin somebody for murder when you're not murdered. Like, he could have done all these other kind of things to kind of get out of this, but it's like, and Tal is able to kind of find him. He extended pretty much this thing from the shuttle to cloak himself, and then he is taken back and put up against the a tribunal for liking females. And it's funny because Clyden comes to thank Tala, and she's like, "You stay the fuck away from me," pretty much. And it's like, yeah. And it's really kind of weird because as it more goes on, you're like, okay, I understand you got your shit, Clyden, but then why the fuck aren't you on Mockless? Why, like, are you doing any of this stuff? Because we see this shit going down further and further because Mockless was doing a deflector upgrade on that kind of thing. We see, like, weapons upgrade stuff going on. We start to see problems coming into effect with Topa as he's exhibiting aggressive tendencies towards females. And that was also another kind of cool thing because then the teacher of his class was Troy from The Next Generation. I'm like, yeah. And that's the effective use of these cameos. They don't overshadow or just like, hey, here's a cameo for cameo's sake. It's like, hey, here's this character. We would like to use probably this actor, and it's a cool kind of thing. If you're into it, you're like, hey, value add. If you're not into it, it doesn't take away from anything. It's not like, I'm a big important person. Because that can sometimes happen and derail a scene. So, yes, I really like this as we see her trying to figure out what's going on. And Bortus is pretty much trying to bring that up with Clyden as it starts to really become headbutting as Clyden is like, I want to teach our son traditional values and stuff. It's like, have you not seen how can you be on this ship and see all these people and all these things and not try and, like, think of new and better kind of ways? It's like, you'd get that more reactionary and turn into a kind of version of the Krill, pretty much. Like, we see that kind of possibility as we learn other things about Mockless, like, we get into an episode towards the end where these two Mocklins need to be kind of transferred and everything. Pretty much calling them a taxi service. And Bortus sees that they're carrying a stasis module for their daughter. Now, granted, At first, I was kind of on Borges' side, but the thing is, I then went to Ed's side. It's like, they could have kidnapped that baby! Okay? I'm like, yeah. And the thing is, Ed was not into taking Topa to Mockless to have that kind of, the correction surgery that they wanted. Not Borges, but like, Borges kind of shifted off of it, and Clyden and everything, because it's like, So it's like, hey, can we at least check that this is your baby? And we find out that we essentially have an Amazon kind of situation where they were taken and they're trying to raise their daughter with other female Mocklins. And we see Havina? Let me see if I say this correctly. But it's a pretty big colony. Yeah, Havina. And they're trying to figure out kind of what to do. And Ed puts forth the fact that they could try and, like, get themselves as an independent state and everything. And it's like a colony of about, like, 6,000 female Mocklins with certain various males around there probably raising their daughters and whatnot. So, yeah. And we see her getting into Dolly Parton and making her case. And you see the Mocklins digging in, and that the Union can't afford to lose them because of how much they rely on their weaponry. And I'm like, okay. The things are, like, granted, they could only go into so much, but they do find an equitable kind of thing in that they leave the colony alone, but they pretty much destroy the Underground Railroad route to kind of get them there. And the thing is, I'm like, you really should kind of understand what's going on here. They are now utilizing within the Union's kind of thing to use as a cudgel their ability to create advanced weaponry. Who's to say that at a certain point they decide not to deal with any more kind of Union people unless they are a male of that species? And that more and more kind of power on there. That's the kind of crazy thing that you start to kind of see and think about. It's like, yeah, that would, like, destroy the whole kind of purpose of the Union. And I understand that you need those kind of weapons, but there could be better kind of ways to do it. You could have your people try and figure out other kind of ways, because they'd take these people, imprison them, force them to have surgery or whatnot. It's like, that is against, like, what the Union's supposed to stand for, and it was a really kind of thought-provoking kind of one. Also, with the whole Dolly Parton and her becoming really into that was kind of cool as well. Let's see here. Let's see, Blood of the Patriots and, like, the simulation one. Blood of the Patriots was a nice kind of riff on what was going on with, like, the Next Generation, with that one captain and the Kardashians, where they find a friend of Gordon's, but he's pretty much been captured and in Krill's space for like 20 years and has been going around pretty much blowing up ships during the ceasefire, and that's kind of fucking around with it because they're pretty much getting into the peace talk negotiation stages with the Krill, and they want his ass, but the thing is they can't figure out how he's been fucking doing it. Well, they find out that he has, not his daughter, but an N-ball, which has blood that, like, is pretty much explosive in a nitrogen, I believe, environment? Upon contact with nitrogen. So he's been utilizing that to kind of, like, make explosives and everything that are pretty much, like, untraceable. And he saved Gordon's life and was attempting to use that to bully him into committing suicide in his own kind of favor. It's like, fuck the Krill, fuck peace. It's like, nah. And they did a nice kind of, like, little trick where it made it look like Gordon was going to help him, but he really didn't. He, like, got out. They were able to stop it and get everything kind of going on with the Krill towards peace. And that's always the tricky kind of thing, because the Krill have authoritarian tendencies and everything. And the thing is, can you balance those and still have an effective peace because of what they've done to people because they believe they don't have souls? When you start getting into that kind of religious fanaticism or that kind of, like, authoritarian kind of doctrinism of also even kind of stuff like with Mockless, with their views on females. You start getting into territories of like, okay, can you have an effective peace with that kind of partner in space? It's like, what's going to happen if they try and push the envelope? How far do you like offer resistance and everything? These are the kind of cool stuff that you'd usually get in Star Trek, and I'm like, yes, this is the kind of cool stuff. And then the simulation was an interesting one because they found like this time capsule with this phone, but then Gordon, of course, fell in love with this simulation recreation of this woman. Though I think it's interesting of trying to figure out a simulation recreating somebody from like all the shit you got on your phone. That's kind of cool. However, it went into the more kind of love story, kind of similar to Geordi's kind of thing. And he starts kind of editing her, and it's interesting to see that kind of thing. It's like, no, the minute you started trying to take that shit away, it became your simulation. And him getting done with it and saying goodbye was kind of cool. But I think it would have been more interesting if he had started getting absorbed into the time, because there was this one thing where he actually made a phone so he could talk with the simulation, and I thought it would have been more interesting if he started using mannerisms, showing up in those kind of clothes, doing those kind of things that he was learning, and was more into the time frame and getting locked more into the simulation and that kind of world, rather than the whole kind of like, oh, I am in love with this representation of her. Let's see here. That. Yeah. Then we get to the end of the season. And that's where things start getting nutty. Because Bortus did have pretty much a confrontation with Clyden, because he was talking with Kelly, and he was bringing up the fact that he didn't really acknowledge Kelly's existence, which is kind of weird because he has talked to other females before. And I understand that they're trying to show his more coming entrenched with his ideals. It's just, I think we needed a little bit more of an ease into that. And then towards the last two episodes where we get introduced to some time travel stuff that honestly is kind of headache inducing. This is where it started to be like, what? Because they were working on this thing, pretty much linking kind of temporal kind of fields to like a person. This gravitational wave came out of nowhere, bumped this thing, and pretty much brought Kelly from 7 years in the past into the present on the Orville. That wasn't what I had the most problem with. Then Ed pretty much tries to date her, which is kind of like, what? Though it is an interesting kind of route exploration because he's 7 years older, and it doesn't really line up that well with the older Kelly. And they're in this kind of dance club kind of scenario. This is where I have a problem mainly, because we see Bortus and Clyden just acting fine when they were pretty much having like a whole kind of argument over what was going on with Topa and everything going on with Mockless, which we did see that Topa was acting better towards a female, as Bortus kind of saw during the classroom scenario. Oh, and we also got Tuvok as a cameo with the whole kind of like cell phone time capsule thing. That was kind of cool. And they're just, I liked the joke of them being like, oh, this dancing for like the club, but I'm just like, I wouldn't think they would be that together at this point. Like, it's really kind of weird. It's almost like ignoring that they have their issues at this point, which is the kind of downside of doing episodic and trying to do as continuity as possible. However, I don't think that this show should get away from the episodic, because they've been doing a fine enough balance. For the most part, this is just one of the ones where it's like, what the fuck? Alright. But we see that they're trying to do their kind of things. Younger Kelly is telling stories that would kind of like screw over older Kelly with her whole kind of like image to the crew. They're trying to like balance all that kind of stuff out. But Lamar and Isaac are able to pretty much figure out a way to like send her back. And they pretty much mind wipe her, send her back. However, the mind wipe doesn't work, and Kelly decides to not go on the second date with Ed, creating a whole kind of new timeline where the Kaylon destroyed Earth, pretty much wiped out half of all life, biological life in the galaxy, I believe. And It's like, okay, and their whole idea is to get Claire back to that point, do the correct mind wipe on Kelly, and everything should be kosher. It's like, all right, but if you're able to do, like, it gets into the point where they're like going around. We see Alara, who's pretty much the leader of the resistance at this one kind of point. They get this kind of protein kind of thing that they need that kind of fucked over Kelly because that's why the mind wipe didn't work. They find that Orville has crashed because in this timeline, Isaac was able to do everything that he needed to get the Kaylon to attack Earth. And it's like, okay, interestingly enough, but the thing is, the time travel gets kind of wonky-doo-dah. As they get to the Orville, Bortus had been surviving for months under there. They get it out. They link into Isaac's kind of brain to kind of finish the whole kind of thing because he was like deactivated, but he was able to get into the whole kind of Kaylon net. And it was interesting to kind of see Kaylons at the height of their kind of power with the heads kind of floating off and attacking like that. That was an interesting kind of move for them to do. But they are able to send Claire back, and she does the whole thing, but then she disappears. And the thing is, how does that work? Because if she disappears at a point where it would almost like take away what she almost just did. It gets really kind of confusing whenever you introduce time travel in this shit, which even though they even fucking acknowledge in the first episode doing it was like, I'm not gonna fucking even kind of like try and explain this shit. It's like, yeah, but the thing is, you have to be very careful when doing this. So they are able to get Kelly to forget, and she does go on the second date, but that's where the season ends. So I'll see kind of how it works out and shakes out. And the third season, I do like to see that she was thinking of trying to like, hey, here's this butterfly effect. If you go back and you try and like remove the pain that these two people cause, what's the rippling kind of effect? And like all the shit that can happen. It's crazy to see all that kind of work out. However, my whole thing is the resolution of it. I have to see the third season, kind of see how that kind of works out. But I overall enjoyed this season, seeing what was going on with the characters, seeing Ed and Kelly's relationship kind of consolidate more professionally, more than the will they, won't they, where Ed's like, I really want to get back together with you, and Kelly's like, no. And even though she loves him and everything, it's like, all right, and then everybody else kind of dealing with all that kind of shit. It's like, all right. But I did like the deep dives on like the Mocklins, the Kaylons, and just the different kind of episodes that were going on. Like, I found enjoyment out of most of the episodes, even though some of us was like, what the fuck are you doing here? What the hell's going on certain things? So I would definitely recommend this because of them balancing more the seriousness and the humor, even though there's some weird wonky shit that happens in certain things. So those are my opinions on the season. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.